I'm Grub Street Lodger, and I thought I'd have another look at a film and a book. I haven't done this for ages because this takes longer. I keep planning on doing the Tom Jones one, but I just never quite get around to it. But this is all about The Duchess and Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire by Amanda Foreman.
When she arrives, all eyes are upon her. When absent, she is the subject of universal conversation.
I read the book because we were reading it for the Dr. Johnson book group. And I enjoyed this book. It was very good. It was the biography of this lady here, Georgiana, who became the Duchess of Devonshire. And, with that, she gained a new rank, and she became the centre of fashion, and she became sort of the person to emulate, and she had new fashions like big hats with big ostrich feathers and tall hair, and her husband was rather cold and not very feeling, and he mainly wanted a male heir off her. And in fact, she had children, and even the newspapers reported it's a shame they're girls until she did give birth to a male. And then she was hounded for debts because, especially in her early time, she got really into gambling, and she had this whole sort of social set. They're all very bitchy. They all speak funny. They have this thing called the Devonshire drawl, where they all sort of speak in a kind of baby voice, and she even writes in it too. Sort of sort of baby voice, and because of the gambling, the debts just build up and up and up, and she never ever in her whole life really gets hold of them, and she lies about them, and she forgets which ones she's got, and she borrows off people to pay other people back, and it gets something quite crazy. And then the other thing is she was involved in politics, and the Duke of Devonshire was always part of the Whig party, who were the opposition, led by Charles James Fox, who she nicknamed the Eyebrow because he had a big eyebrow. He's also always sort of depicted unshaved and rather rough looking. He initially had quite a bit of money, but he gambled all that away, and he was sort of the leader of the opposition. And she was known to Fanny Burney anyway as the leader of the public opposition. And during the general election, the Whigs were going to do badly, but they wanted to win Westminster. As like, look, we got this one, and we got Charles James Fox in. And so she actually went out campaigning in the street and with a bunch of other titled women. And there's all these sort of rumours and salacious gossip about her kissing butchers for their vote and stuff, but later on she actually gained more power, but not quite so publicly, and she becomes almost like Malcolm Tucker. She's like the person underneath. She sorts out the spin. She makes like fashions to follow the Whigs, like all the Whig followers start wearing fox tails on them because he's Fox and things like that. The other thing is she had a number of affairs, and her husband had one particular affair with her best friend, and they all three lived together. It's a hell of a life. She did an awful lot. The book, what I really like about the book is it goes into psychology, really. And whether it's true, it's hard to say. You can't really psychologize a dead person. But she says about how Georgiana was raised sort of in politeness and almost the surfaces of things, and was raised to be outgoing, and was raised to please people. What was a good daughter? A good daughter was a people pleaser. She pleased her husband, she pleased society, etc., etc. And then what this led to was that Georgiana was easily conned, or indeed just sort of peer pressured into doing silly things, and indeed very much peer pressured because they were peers of the realm that were doing it, and sometimes she felt empty, or it took her a long time to learn to feel that she was good enough in herself. And as the book describes it, I think she does learn that as she goes along, and she does a lot. A lot of the book is about how hampered in she is by being a woman, and how it's very difficult, because she hasn't got any legal or official power, but how she does with what she can, and actually how she becomes powerful, negotiating all these political alliances and things like that. And also powerful as a leader of fashion. So that was all very interesting. I very much liked this book. And I was halfway through reading it, and I was chatting with a person at the Dr. Johnson house when I volunteer there on Saturdays. And she said, "Oh, you seen the film?" And I said, "Yeah, I have, but I don't remember much more than just Keira Knightley pouting." And she went, "Oh, the film is so miserable." And halfway through reading this book, I did indeed watch the film. The film was quite miserable. And in fact, I have notes about the film from, writing down just what I'm noticing as the film's going along, and then from where I haven't read yet. And it was quite interesting to see and try and guess which parts of the film were from the book and how they adapted it. So here we go, adaptation time. So it's a long book. It's 600 pages. Not quite. 450 pages. Oh, this book has the word book inside it. Thanks for that. That'll be some kid who's put that there. It's a long book, and it's a long and full life, and to shrink it down and all of that is pretty good. And so the film is telling kind of an anti-Cinderella story. Here's this beautiful girl, she gets married, and that's where the problems start.
Your mother called it common decency before personal gratification, or some such thing. The exact words escape me.
How about in prison, in my own house?
No. That's not how she put it. I would have remembered that.
On her relationship with her husband. So her husband's played by Voldemort. And he's played very cold and calculating and not very loving. His greatest affections are shown to his dogs.
I'm in no mood for a conversation.
And in fact, his nickname, because they all had nicknames, his nickname was Carnis, which is Latin for dog. And Georgiana would often label him C in her letters. Is C all right? Because that is where he showed most of his affections. And he was not a very affectionate person. And in fact, one of the best scenes in this, early on, is their first sex scene. And of course, that's not in the biography, because she didn't write about it in her letters. But it really shows the power imbalance between the two, because he's just commanding her what to do.
You go to the bed.
And one of the other interesting elements of this is, it wasn't mentioned in the book, but I love it in this film, how there are just servants everywhere. So they're having private conversations and private moments, and there are servants everywhere. They're coming home, there are servants everywhere. Just servants, servants, servants. There is no private thing. Everything they do will become public because some servant will have seen it, because they are everywhere. And that also makes it interesting, because it's like they're not real people because they're servants. And to these landed gentry, they're not proper people. But then that's also interesting because, the servants are real people, and they're watching these other real people live their lives out in front of them. I found that very, very interesting. And that's part of the whole Duke of Devonshire thing. And then the idea of the heir comes up again and again in this, and how disappointed he is, and all of that. And then came the break where I hadn't read the book yet, and the big things happen. And in terms of him, in the film, he rapes her, and the son is born with a rape. And yet again, this is another occasion of a fiction adding rape in for dramatic tension. This happened in Fanny Hill, where there wasn't any rape in the book. This happened in the fictional version of the book version of what's her name? The princess. Lady Caribou, Princess Caribou. People just seem to shove rapes in to make it dramatic. And this book doesn't portray any marital rape. In fact, she seems to be very keen on getting with him, and he's the one who's more diffident about it. And so I do find that strange, I have to say. And there is a big push in the film to make you very much not like him. And he doesn't seem like a very likeable person. Even his friends said that he wasn't a very outgoing person, that he wasn't a very exciting person, he wasn't very interested in anything, and he was just kind of just kind of lazy and meh. And that his relationship with his wife was cold and formal at first, and there are letters from Georgiana to her mother where she's sort of, I thought he'd be more like Dad. I thought he'd have a warm centre underneath.
I mean, it's not that he's unkind, but he never talks to me. I thought that he would be like Papa, that under his cool reserve there'd be a wealth of depth and sentiment, but he isn't interested in anything.
And he didn't really. The mum's also very well depicted in this because she's a nag, as Georgiana's mum really was. So they've added this marital rape thing in, and then it gets this thing when she's loving Grey later. Earl Grey as in Earl Grey tea, and he says, if you want to be with her, this.
I will see to it that every home and every checkbook in this country is closed to him. He will be welcome neither in the halls of government nor in its back rooms of power. His dream of becoming Prime Minister and your mutual fantasy of a changed world will be dead as ash.
And that's funny, because that's not quite what happened, or indeed not at all what happened. She did exile herself, but it was not really because of Earl Grey. I mean, she did need to go out of the country to have this baby, so that people wouldn't know about it, but it was more because of her debts. And that's the big difference between the film and the book. The film is, one, more miserable, but two, more about relationships. So about her relationship with her husband, and then this cuckoo in the nest comes in, Bess. And Bess later, Bess and her husband later have sex and have a relationship. And Georgiana was very upset about this at first. But what develops is this kind of thruple, this system, this thing that works. One, they have all their kids there, and all their kids are all together and become friends, and it's this big sort of warm sounding family. And a lot of the kids remember a lot of their childhood quite warmly. But two, it's not that it didn't ruin their relationship. You got scenes in this where Georgiana's sort of dead to the world and she's just moving around like a zombie, and where she knows the humiliation of people knowing that she's not pleasing her husband. But that's not how it's portrayed in the book. In the book, she becomes better friends with Bess out of this, and then she and Bess can kind of gang up against her husband, and when her husband's driving her crazy, Bess is there to be, I know what he's like. And then when she's annoying her husband, Bess is there to comfort the husband, and this threesome actually really, really works in the book. They become this very solid relationship of three, with love sort of darting all the different ways, and in fact it allows Georgiana and her husband to develop their own proper relationship anyway. So that's kind of sweet. But in this, it's all doom and gloom and horrible and bad. So, that was interesting. Another interesting difference, they don't really go into the politics. They have a montage of the Westminster stuff, but they don't really go into how much Georgiana was involved in sort of organising the Whig Party, especially they had a huge dip, and they kind of researched and how much she was involved in that and organising it so that they could make the most of the occasion. All this, that's not really in there. And then the other thing that's not really mentioned so much, it gets some words mentioned, but it's debt. she went on exile because of debt. Her biggest problem with her husband was not, that he was shagging this best woman, but that she couldn't ever really tell him about her debts. And when she did, she could never really tell him about all her debts, and so she never really cleared her debts. That it's the debt that's really hounding this. This is a solid relationship between these three people, and it's the debt that's pounding them down. It's not relationship troubles. And there's so much more joy in the book, and so much more pleasure, and they enjoy each other, and they enjoy their children, and they enjoy having a good time, and all of this. There's a scene in this where this happens.
Please put out Her Grace's hair.
And that's not something that happened to her. That's from a caricature. That's from a guy taking the piss. That's not something that happened. And so the film always leans into the most unpleasant version of anything that could be. I suppose the most dramatic version, but yeah. The film's, every mealtime in the film takes place on a large table with people who aren't talking to each other. Whereas the book shows these people who, when they're away from each other, are always writing letters. Letters are flying about the place. And it's not so easy to send letters from, through revolutionary France and stuff, which Georgiana found herself there during the revolution, and a friend of Marie Antoinette, and she had to scarp it pretty quickly. This is a full life she's living here. She got into science. She got into geology. She had her own science lab in the back garden. She invented fashions. She forged political alliances. She had polite conversations with her husband, and way more teasing conversations with Bess. She raised her children. She was quite revolutionary in breastfeeding her own children, and was really, really sort of focused on them. She held huge parties. The film just focuses on the drear, and it becomes quite a dreary film because of it. If this is less structured than some of my other discussions of films and adaptations, it's because I really couldn't be bothered to watch this film again, because it was kind of dull. And the real life was so much less dull. It's not helped for me by the fact that Keira Knightley plays Georgiana, because for me, Keira Knightley's just a pout machine. She's just all the time. But it sounds nasty, but it's not as nasty as a reviewer of this. A reviewer of this says that they can't believe that her scrawny boy frame can give birth to all the children. It was the most horrible, nasty, sort of misogynistic thing I read when I was just browsing reviews. I'm like, that's the kind of thing that the old newspapers, the hack newspapers, would have written about Georgiana, to be honest. So this is a little bit up in the air, a bit here and there. It's not a very structured video. If I could be asked, I could make it more structured. This is just a bit of a ramble. But the ramble is essentially, the book's more complex, of course, because it's a book. And so, yes, of course, the film had to simplify it. And what the film decided to go with is emotional trauma, sadness, and dry, dusty life. And then actually, the film cheats because it tries to end on a happy ending. And the happy ending is she went back into society, and they were doing this. And it's like, given the content of the film, her going back into society is not a happy ending because she hates it. Given real life, she enjoyed going back into society, and she held some big parties for her daughter, and yeah. But given what you presented in the film, it's a not happy ending that's presented as a happy ending, and they all lived unhappily ever after. It's not quite how the book presents it. I much prefer the book, not just because of the details. In fact, the book's a tad too long for me, but because it shows her as a full person living a full life with ups and downs, whereas the film is just ugh.
And it seems to me you